evening. This is Rebecca Rains coming to you from the NAACP. We are here talking about more issues as they relate to guns. Last week we had a lot of call-ins. We were very excited to hear from all of our callers about how they felt about officers having assault weapons. And we'd like to continue that conversation this week because I felt that there were some who still wanted to get their point across and let their voices be heard. And so we're open to let you hear that. We also have another topic on the issue of guns as something that happened in the House. Before we get started on those two things, I'd like to welcome you to contact us at the NAACP Westside branch, which is, the phone number is 773-261-5890, or come and visit us every first Saturday of the month, except for in July at 1 o'clock at 5820 West Chicago Avenue. And I'll show you that again later on. To get started, we're going to, just a recap, we spoke last week about the kind of push right now that some of the aldermen are making to put assault weapons in the hands of our police officers. What do you think about that? What do you feel about it? Is it something that you think should happen? And some of the discussions that we had last week, some said that they thought that maybe not assault weapons, but occupation should occur, that we should have militia called into the city to kind of bring down some of the violence that's been going on in the city. If you've been following the news as of late, you'll know that today in the Illinois House of Representatives, they passed a Bill 70-41 that will have stricter penalties for repeat gun offenders. So instead of a gun offender getting 3 to 14 years, they will now get 7 to 14 years. There was a lot of dissent in the group about this law being passed. I would like to be able to look later on, and when we have another session, we can talk about maybe who voted yes and who voted no, and kind of figure out where these votes are coming from. There was a lot of members of the Black Caucus in particular who made statements that there's been no proof that a tougher penalty will in any way decrease violence. I heard a number come by that maybe the decrease is hoping to come by 50%. Do you think that having people in jail for longer periods for violating gun laws will lower the violence in Chicago? I have an opinion about it, but I'll let you share yours first. You can give us a call at 312-738-1060. That's 312-738-1060. I want to know what you think. I kind of think, and I'll start off by saying that my thoughts about guns is that they are the new drug. So we all heard about the war on drugs, which was started back in the 70s, an attempt to get drugs off the street by saying that we're going to put harsher penalties down on certain kinds of drugs, and we're going to make sure that people really pay if they get into these drugs. One of the little side note, an interesting topic that I have on that is that crack cocaine was one of those drugs that received a harsher penalty, and people, they couldn't get by. A certain kind of person uses crack versus cocaine, which did not have such a harsh penalty. And now in the more recent times, in the past year, we've been hearing about these drugs called codeines, which are prescription drugs. And instead of us hearing about people being more penalized for the use of these codeines, we're hearing about support groups and how we need to do things to help people who have these addictions because they're just suffering, versus the ideology that comes behind with crack cocaine and the fact that we need to keep those people in jail longer. Now those same arguments are being used about guns. So while we have one side of our government and of our institutions saying we have a Second Amendment rights, people should be able to have guns, and we want to make sure that everybody has a right to carry any kind of assault handgun, rifle, hunting, whatever they want to use it, they have a right to have that gun. We do not want gun control in this country. It's a violation of our Second Amendment. In the same breath, we are now on our more local level, on our house level, passing laws to say, but if you have a gun and we've deemed that you don't deserve to have a gun, then we're going to be able to put you in prison longer. I kind of ask the question, where does our Second Amendment come in? At what point are we violating that law or that right for some and making sure that others never have theirs impeded? Who is going to be paying that cost? Who is going to be looking at that penalty? Who are really the people that we don't want to have weapons? And that's the big question. Who do we want running around? Who's violating that right, or who really has a right to a weapon? And how do you make that determination? How do you do it fairly? How do you come by and say one person should and one person should not? Maybe it's a question of who determines who a person is. We'll have some discussions later on, as we did a couple of weeks ago, about second-class citizens. Who is that second-class citizen? What determines that you are a second-class citizen? Is it rehabilitation? Are you able to come back into society once you've gone through so-called rehabilitation and that puts you back at first-class status? Or are once a felon, always a felon, and therefore never able to carry a weapon, regardless of what you've been put into prison about? These are the people that we're going to keep weapons out of their hands and make sure that they're not able to move forward and push forward with those. So those are our discussion topics for today. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Let me know what you think and what you feel about it. I believe that the House law that was passed today, pretty strongly passed, was presented by Leader Durkin, who presented this to the House and wanted it to be passed. Representative Thaddeus Jones did put a hold on it. He put a motion on the floor to have it held from being finalized by the House, the Illinois Senate. And from what I read in the newspaper today, the Leader Durkin is going to try to get that motion removed by next week so that the law can pass fully and be finalized and they can begin to act on it. According to this law, after they pass, after a person is convicted of getting these stronger penalties for being a repeat gun offender, if a judge wants to determine not to give them that 7-year minimum up to 14 years, then they would have to give a written reason as of to why they felt that this person should be given that harder crime, given a harder penalty. And so it's going to be more paperwork, more legislation for making sure that people are not carrying guns. In the meantime, while we're making sure that those harsher penalties exist, we're also in the same discussion of let's put more assault weapons on the streets in the hands of our officers. So do you think that's going to get rid of violence? Our mayor does. Mayor Rahm Emanuel is in support of this bill. He feels that it will lessen violence. I'm not as sure. I didn't read any reasoning about why it will, but it'll give people longer sentences. I'm also of the agreement that if you give people harsher penalties, you make them more willing to do what they need to do in order to stay out of that position, and therefore possibly more violent because they know that the penalty is harsher. I also did not read if there were anything associated with people who are providing weapons to those who are repeat offenders, if they are able to, if they also will receive harsher penalties, as I know that currently there is a standard, I believe a minimum of 5 years for those who provide weapons to felons or ex-convicts. So what's your thoughts? What are your ideas? Do you think that this is something that we should be looking forward to? Do you think these are the measures that we need to take to lessen violence in the city of Chicago? I do agree that the violence is at an all-time high. It seems to be getting worse, and there doesn't seem to be anything that we can do on a policy side to stop it. Do you think this policy is going to be that policy, that it will drop it down by 50%, or will it just fill up the jail cells? Will it just fill up the prison houses with people, and once they get back out, they'll be back at it, more willing to hide, more willing to keep from getting caught? Do you think that the the war on guns is just a replacement for the war on drugs, another way to persecute and put away African American, or as I like to prefer to use, black men and Latino men, to make sure that they go into jail for much longer periods. It looks like we have our first caller. Caller, I can hear you.
Yes, good evening. I called you
Good
last
evening.
week. My name is Ray. But the things I want to know, you asked who are second-class citizens. We all
Yes.
are. You can't go in your yard and play. You can't sit on your porch. You can't go to the park. So who's a second-class citizen? We are, all of us, all of Chicago. And why is that? Because you got the gangbangers running everything. But when I hear they want to give longer sentences to people who have 2, 3, 4 arrests, gun arrests, and you don't want that. What are we gonna do so we can all come out in our yard? You don't have to worry about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Second class citizens, all of us being that. Well, I agree that if you are being locked up in your house, maybe you're not a second class citizen, but you're a prisoner to your home. What do we need to do? That's a good question. That's the question that I asked. As we talked about last week, we said people need to have stronger homes. People need to be watching out for their children, making sure they're raising children right, raising themselves right, getting away from ideas that keep them locked up. I do kind of disagree that all of Chicago is a second class citizen, because there are areas that do not experience the violence. There are parts of Chicago where people always sit outside. They sit on their porches, they go out, they take walks, they go to the park, they do whatever they please, because violence is not something that they're really worried about. There's only certain portions and sides of town that worry about that. And the question is, why there? What's going on in that place where those people are living, as you say, as second class citizens, but I more importantly say as prisoners inside their homes? The things as we talk about, even as we talk about bringing assault rifles and assault weapons into anyone's hands, is that you can sit in your home all day long. Those bullets will come through. They'll find you inside your homes just like they find you anywhere else. And so when we start talking about putting down harsher penalties and in some ways, as you can say, cracking down on crime, is it really going to set you free? Is it really going to be able to bring you out of your house and allow you to be that free person that you have the right to be? And I think that's the question. My thought is no. I don't think so. I don't think that harsher penalties are what we need. I do think what we need is programs. I think that people have a strong sense of hopelessness for various reasons. But my biggest thought, my biggest idea is they just don't have anything else to do. They don't have another way of making money. Once you get deemed as a felon or a convict in this country, you are forever stuck. You don't have an option to say, you want to know what? I'm just going to go out now. I'm going to live in this place. I'm going to get this job, and I'm going to become an upstanding citizen because I see that what I did was wrong and that I need to live a different kind of life. In this country, in this place, that's not an option. People are held to what they did decades ago forever. And they're kind of restricted that the only thing that you're ever going to be able to do is more crime. And as the way things run now, the only way that you can continue crime is to have more guns. As I was getting on right before we had our caller and I was asking about the war on drugs, we've heard some rumors that guns are falling off of trains, they're falling off of trucks, they're landing in neighborhoods on the south side and just kind of falling in. Where do these guns come from? You can't convince me that an assault weapon is just disappearing from its original owners or its makers. I believe that guns are being dropped in our city, and the question is, who's dropping them and what are we going to do about it? Are we just going to stand by and allow people to kind of just disperse this thing, and after they're being dispersed and of course used, then we're going to put people in jail for a lot longer. Seems like it's a 2-for-1 deal. We'll drop guns in these neighborhoods, and for the people who don't get killed by that violence that those guns promote, we'll be able to imprison them for longer. So eventually we'll be able to wipe people off for whatever genocide that they don't commit on themselves. We'll lock them up. We'll make caged animals of them. And it's something to be concerned about. It's something to think about. Is this something that we promoted, or is this just, maybe this is just the way it is? This is just the way the world is going. I do ask, what do you think will help? What is your situation? What has been your experience with these kinds of issues? Do you think there's something that we can do to slow down this process that we've been going, that's getting us deeper and deeper into violence, in which guns are accessible to everyone, no matter what their status is, and once they get one, they won't be able to get another. I think it's a bigger question. I think there's something that lends to say, rather than putting on stronger penalties, why don't we create gun control? And why is there such a big fight to say that we're going to restrict who's allowed to get guns, but not such a big fight against saying what we're going to do once you have one? It's a big question that we've been having for a number of years in this country, and it seems like we can't settle on one because there's some people who want to have uninhibited access to guns and to violent methodologies, and maybe it's those people who don't live in violent neighborhoods. They don't worry about having to stay in their houses in order to feel safe, that push against this fight. Maybe it's the people who are making the guns and want to be able to sell more. They have pacts with groups that are of no good, to make sure that these guns are on the street and being widely used and are making this circular motion. There's a black market for them, and I'm not completely convinced that some of the more upstanding sellers of these things are not participatory in this market. And when being a part of this market for these illegal weapons, that helps people to just foster in violence. When we start to create policies, I think we need to create policies that are social, that have people in mind to help bring them out of this hopeless state, not necessarily imprison them longer for being caught up in it. It's a hard decision to make. It's a hard determination to figure out what's going to lead people further on, what's going to make them feel like I do have opportunities and I do have choices. But it's certainly bound, heavily bound in the fact that once I make a bad decision, I'm conditioned, I'm accused, I have no options but to continue to make bad decisions in order to move forward, because nothing else is left for me. And this is something that we've seen happen over and over again in our time, in our history, and we continue to repeat it. And the question is, why? Why don't we try something different? Why don't we put out some social programs? Why don't we start looking into our schools, looking into our homes? How can we help people? What do you need to feel like you're a part of the society, something that you want to contribute to rather than take away from? That's a question that we seem to not really often ask. In the same measure, in the same breath today, as I read the same article, it also talked about having tax rises, and it talked about making sure that state officers are not enforcing federal immigration rules, that officers won't be able to pull someone over based on their immigration status. And so we are taking one group and we're prosecuting them to the max as much as we can think to, and another group, and we're saying we want to make sure that you're not in a position where you have to worry about the law. Both groups are in violation of some law or in violation of some standard, even though I'm not really sure that, I say that, but I'm not really sure that it is a real law, because we have a law about repeat offenders not having guns, but who established that, and is it really a violation of the Second Amendment? What, I guess the Second Amendment establishes what makes a citizen and what doesn't make a citizen, and that becomes the question, is it unconstitutional? But we do have our laws that say you have to come into this country with everything legal, our papers in order. And when we come across people in that, while we think that there's some inhumane practices about how illegal immigration is coming through and how people are being found in that, the question is, why are we creating measures that protect those who are not citizens and so freely disregarding or increasing measures that are further hindering people who are citizens of this nation? It is a question that we have to ask and something that we need to consider as we look into our laws, something that we need to consider as we look to our lawmakers. What did your representative vote today? What is your senator going to vote? Is this something that they're going to stand behind? Do you stand behind it? And if you stand behind it, then it's great that they stand behind it. But if you don't stand behind it, it's something that you need to start pressing forward is, how do we determine who's who in this country? How do we determine what place people need to stand on? Should there be a determination? Should it be as soon as you're here? If you're not a part of the actual penal system, should you be free to carry weapons as you choose? I'm kind of the point that if you're not a part of the penal system right now, and I mean that even in part of on a parole status, that you should not be restricted. If we're going to have rules that say that everyone should be able to have guns, that's everyone. Everyone should have that status. And if we don't want certain people to have guns, then we need to create gun control laws that make sure that across the board, by a certain standard, we make that law consistent. That is something that we're consistently holding to, that we do not want certain kinds of weapons and certain people to have weapons at all. And that's something that we need to establish across the board. And right now, I don't think it's really being evenly established and put out. I think that we are very unequally saying who should be a part of this process and who should not be a part of this process. I thank you all for calling in today. And it looks like we're going to have one more person to call in our last minute. Caller, I can hear you. Caller?
Hello?
Hi.
Yes. Hi. I'm
Hi.
calling because I wanted to ask a question. Is family counseling available?
Is who?
Family counseling available?
Stanley Counseling?
Yes.
Oh, family counseling available.
Yes.
I think that there are some nonprofits that offer family counseling. Sometimes I think it comes down from those who I know who have had family counseling. It's been mandated by court. But I don't know about family counseling that's just kind of free or offered, or what the standard is for how it's disseminated. Does that answer your question, caller? Looks like we've lost our caller. Okay, well, I thank you all, both our callers, for calling in today, for expressing your opinion. I thank you very much for watching. As we wrap up, I just want to remind you that you can contact the NAACP Westside branch at 773-261-5890, or come and see us the first Saturday of every month at 1 o'clock. We love to have visitors. I thank you for watching, and goodbye.